The story follows a lone adventurer who defied a forbidden law. According to an ancient nobleman's diary, consuming monsters was considered a grave taboo in this world. For a human to ingest a monster meant absorbing its dark essence. The first symptom of this curse was a surge of indescribable euphoria, coupled with an immediate enhancement of physical strength. The second stage brought unbearable headaches, intense nausea, and a state of overwhelming intoxication. But the final, and perhaps deadliest, symptom was instant death upon consuming the monster's essence, or, worse yet, the transformation of the person into a monster themselves. In the dimly lit chamber deep within the labyrinth, a man sat atop the lifeless body of a monster, his hand crushed and mangled. He was relentlessly devouring the creature's flesh. As he finished the last bite, his wounds began to miraculously heal. In that instant, he gained 2 new skills, Roar and Battle Axe. Overcome with fury, he unleashed a deafening roar, his voice resonating through the darkness. The sound echoed throughout the labyrinth, alerting every nearby monster to his presence. Upon hearing the man's roar, the nearby monsters charged toward him, intent on killing him. As they lunged at him, the man swiftly drew his axe and began his bloody rampage, slaughtering every creature that rushed his way. No matter how fiercely the monsters attacked, he dispatched them instantly with powerful swings of his weapon. With each kill, he devoured their remains, absorbing their essence into his body. As he consumed more, he gained new skills, further enhancing his strength and fueling his relentless massacre. As the man continued his relentless slaughter, he gained a multitude of new skills, including agility boost, lightning cloak, poison mist, and thread manipulation, among others. He skillfully employed each ability to aid him in his fight against the seemingly endless monsters. Despite his immense power and the numerous skills at his disposal, the sheer number of monsters began to wear him down, and fatigue started to set in. Confident he had slain enough to escape the labyrinth, he paused for a moment, only to realize that countless more monsters still surrounded him, closing in from all sides. As the man stood surrounded by the approaching monsters, he made a firm resolve. In that moment, he vowed to himself that he would kill every last one of them, escape the labyrinth alive, and return home safely, no matter the cost. In the frontier city of Bologna, a territory dotted with numerous labyrinths, one stood out among the rest, the miasma labyrinth. The very air inside it relentlessly sapped the strength of any adventurer who dared to enter. Most avoided the place, despising the constant drain on their abilities, except for one man, Rude. Rude frequently ventured into the labyrinth, unbothered by its dangers. Over time, the other adventurers began to call him the miasma scavenger, for his fearless persistence in exploring its depths. As Rude stepped into the miasma labyrinth, a sense of satisfaction washed over him. He had made it to the 6th floor, and as he surveyed the ground, he was pleased to find an abundance of miasma grass growing there. This rare herb, known for its ability to purify miasma, was an invaluable source of income for him. However, Rude reminded himself not to be greedy. He resolved to harvest only what he needed, taking just the right amount to ensure the labyrinth could replenish its supply. As Rude surveyed the miasma grass, he smiled, knowing that the harvest from the 6th floor would sustain him for about 3 days. As he continued through the labyrinth, he encountered miasma rats scurrying about. Many of the monsters in the miasma labyrinth wielded miasma and poison, which contributed to the adventurer's aversion to the place. However, these miasma and poison attacks were ineffective against Rude, who was impervious to their effects. Rude rushed toward the miasma rats, determined to eliminate them. However, as he fought, he began to struggle against the overwhelming number of rats swarming the area. Just as he was grappling with the situation, an unknown adventurer arrived and cast a fireball to help him. Unfortunately, the spell missed its target, allowing the rat to escape. Stunned and confused, Rude sat on the ground, trying to make sense of the unexpected intervention. Rude turned to the direction from which the fireball had come and saw 3 adventurers standing there. Recognizing their faces from the Adventurers Guild, he felt a surge of annoyance at their presence. At that moment, one of the 3 adventurers turned to the one who had cast the fireball and suggested that he should have aimed closer to ensure the spell hit its target. At that moment, one of the 3 adventurers extended a hand to help Rude up and apologized for the mishap. He introduced himself and asked Rude's name. Noting that Rude appeared to be struggling against the miasma rats, the adventurer explained that he and his companions had only intended to assist him in the fight. Rude, brushing off the adventurer's offer of help, got up on his own. He thanked the adventurer for his concern but requested that he be given a warning before any actions that might endanger him. Annoyed, the adventurer snapped that the reason he had shouted, "Fireball," was precisely to alert Rude before casting the spell. As they were talking, one of the three adventurers opened a door and informed the other two that the room beyond was filled with miasma grass. The other two adventurers were thrilled and excited by the news, but Rude was displeased by what he had just heard. Rude then asked why they had been secretly following him through the labyrinth and suggested they might be after his harvesting spot. One of the adventurers, looking irritated, explained that they were simply adventurers trying to make a living in the labyrinth and had coincidentally crossed paths with Rude. He added that they had merely come to his aid while saving him from the miasma rats and that Rude should be grateful for their assistance. The three adventurers glared at Rude with expressions of disgust and menace, fully aware that he was powerless to retaliate even if he was in the right. After some careful thought, Rude approached them, apologized for accusing them of following him, and thanked them for their help against the miasma rats. He understood that, despite his grievance, he had no means to confront them and thus decided to go along with the situation. Back in Bologna, at a restaurant called Full Belly, Rude was thrown to the floor by two men. One of them scolded Rude, saying that his presence in the restaurant ruined the taste of the food with his unpleasant smell. The man told Rude that he was banned from entering the establishment because Rude clearly couldn't understand how disruptive his smell was to other customers. At that moment, one of the men looked at Rude and said that a true adventurer was someone who could defeat monsters. He sneered, telling Rude that with his worthless skill, abnormal status nullification, he would never be able to become a real adventurer, no matter how hard he tried. The two men laughed loudly as they taunted Rude, who could only stand there in silence, unable to respond. Abnormal status nullification was Rude's unique ability. While it was useful for exploring the miasma labyrinth, it had a significant drawback. It did not provide Rude with the combat skills needed to defeat monsters, which are essential for any adventurer. As a result, Rude, lacking any offensive skills, was not welcomed in any adventuring party. His inability to contribute in battles and his reliance on scavenging the labyrinth's lower levels led to his being labeled as the miasma scavenger. This title reflected both his skills' limitations and his role in searching for items in the labyrinth's depths. Ultimately, Rude's ineffective skill caused him to be seen as an outcast rather than a true adventurer. At that moment, Rude reflected on his situation, feeling frustrated that, as a grown man, he still had to fight life or death battles against mere rats. He returned to his inn and lay down on his bed, troubled by the thought that he might continue to live his life as the miasma scavenger. Rude was disheartened by the realization that no one saw him as a true adventurer or respected him. Instead, he was always treated poorly. The next day, Rude arrived at the Adventurers Guild. As he entered, he thought about finding a new patch of miasma grass in a different location, as he still had some money left from the miasma grass he had sold the previous day. Noticing the unusually loud commotion in the guild, Rude wondered what was causing all the noise. Rude approached one of the staff members at the Adventurers Guild and asked if she had any good job requests or tasks to recommend. Upon recognizing him, the woman addressed him as the miasma scavenger and informed him that a new labyrinth had been discovered. Rude was stunned by the news. A newly discovered labyrinth meant it would be filled with untapped treasures and magical items. It was a golden opportunity for any adventurer, and Rude was thrilled at the prospect. He saw it as a chance to change his life and escape his current status. Rude then realized why the guild was so noisy. Everyone was excited about the newly discovered labyrinth. As he surveyed the bustling room, the woman interrupted him, noting that the price of the miasma herb, which Rude typically brought in, would begin to drop immediately. Rude was initially puzzled but soon became worried upon hearing the woman's comment. He asked her why the price of the miasma herb would decrease. The woman explained that the miasma labyrinth had never been particularly popular, and with adventurers now flocking to the newly discovered labyrinth, there would be little demand for the miasma herb. Consequently, prices for the herb were expected to drop. As Rude contemplated his options, the woman added that the new labyrinth was located in the Avellio Mountains and that he would not be allowed to enter. Shocked by this news, Rude asked why he was barred from exploring the new labyrinth. The woman showed him a poster that outlined the entry requirements. Adventurers needed to be D rank or higher to gain access. Since Rude was only an E rank adventurer, he did not meet the qualifications to enter the new labyrinth. Looking worried, Rude told the woman that he was determined to explore the new labyrinth. He asked if there was any way he could qualify to enter. The woman sighed and explained that the rules were strict, and he needed to meet the requirements to gain entry. She added that even if Rude somehow managed to get in, he would likely perish in vain due to his lack of strength and the absence of a party to support him. Without the necessary combat skills and allies, he would be left to face the labyrinth's dangers alone. Rude couldn't dispute the woman's words. She spoke the truth about his situation. At that moment, an adventurer named Bear approached from behind and suggested that if Rude was so determined to explore the new labyrinth, he should join Bear's team as a porter. Bear smiled at Rude, while Rude looked back at him with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. After a short while, Rude found himself in a carriage with Bear's team, en route to the newly discovered labyrinth. Breaking the silence, Bear turned to Rude and expressed his pleasure at having met him. He explained that he had been looking for someone to help carry materials from the new labyrinth but had struggled to find anyone. Bear was relieved and happy to have found Rude for the task. Rude, meanwhile, reflected that Bear's difficulty in finding a porter might be due to all the adventurers flocking to the new labyrinth, making it hard to secure one. As Rude pondered this, one of Bear's companions, a red-haired woman named Sasha, voiced her concern. She asked Bear why they were bringing a miasma scavenger, like Rude, and suggested they should have chosen a different porter. Another companion, a heavily built man named Rick, agreed, questioning Bear's decision and implying they should have found someone more qualified than Rude. Bear then addressed his two companions, telling them not to speak badly about Rude. He explained that, given Rude's experience as an adventurer, it was preferable to have him accompany them rather than a less experienced newcomer. Shifting the topic, Bear turned to Rude and apologized for not properly introducing himself earlier. He introduced himself as Bear, the leader of the Scarlet Sword group, and also introduced Rude to his companions, Sasha, the red-haired woman, and Rick, the large-built man. Bear then informed Rude that the three of them were D-rank adventurers. In response, Rude introduced himself, stating that he was an E-rank adventurer. Bear expressed a desire to learn more about Rude's status before they entered the new labyrinth and asked if Rude would be willing to show him his guild card. Rude complied, taking out his guild card and presenting it to Bear. On Rude's guild card, it was noted that he was a level 7 E-rank adventurer with 4 types of skills. Bear, examining the card, inquired if Rude could use fire magic, as one of his skills was indeed fire magic. Rude explained that his fire magic was too weak to be effective in combat but mentioned that it proved useful in dark places and for cooking food. Bear, smiling, reassured Rude that despite its limited power, the skill still had its uses. A few moments later, the 4 of them arrived at the new labyrinth. Bear, Rick, and Sasha were buzzing with excitement as they stood before the entrance. Bear announced that they had reached the newly discovered Avalio labyrinth. Sasha, brimming with enthusiasm, remarked that it seemed they might be among the first to arrive. However, Rick quickly urged everyone not to waste any time and to start exploring the labyrinth immediately. As they opened the door, they were surprised to find that the labyrinth was already teeming with adventurers. Hundreds of adventurers were already inside, busy collecting loot and making the labyrinth feel crowded. Sasha, seeing the crowds, was disappointed and frustrated. She had expected to be among the first to enter the labyrinth, but it was clear they were not. Bear, noting the situation, informed his team that it appeared most of the first layer of the labyrinth had already been thoroughly explored. He warned that if they stayed in the first layer, they would likely find little to no loot. Rick reassured Sasha, telling her not to be disheartened and suggesting they should head to the deeper levels that hadn't yet been explored by other adventurers. Sasha agreed, excited at the prospect of exploring uncharted areas. Just then, Rude interrupted, pointing out that since this was a newly discovered labyrinth, it would be wiser to map out the first layer thoroughly before venturing into the deeper levels. As Rude made his suggestion, Sasha and Rick rudely interrupted him, dismissing his input and stating that they had no intention of taking advice from a porter. They added that Rude was not in a position to offer opinions. Rick further commented that this was why Rude remained an E-rank adventurer. At that moment, Bear stepped in, telling Sasha and Rick to stop criticizing Rude. He reminded them that Rude meant no harm with his suggestion and that they should consider his input. Although Bear intervened to stop Sasha and Rick's criticism, he did agree with their perspective. He told Rude that if they continued to focus on the first layer, they wouldn't achieve significant results. Bear explained that to find truly valuable and unique treasures, they needed to delve into the deeper levels of the labyrinth. After a while, the four of them reached the fourth level of the labyrinth. As they fought monsters, Rude struggled to defend himself, while the other three found it relatively easy to handle the creatures on this level. Rick, smiling, told Rude not to be intimidated by the smaller monsters. As Rude watched them, he thought to himself that Bear, Rick, and Sasha were far stronger than he was, easily handling the monsters he was struggling to fight. Rude felt overwhelmed and nervous, unable to move his hands or face the monsters effectively. He was unable to contribute to the battle or assist the others in any way. After a while, the three had successfully defeated all the monsters in the area. Sasha remarked that it was a good decision to venture to the deeper levels and added that it was a relief to find no other adventurers in their current level. Bear agreed, noting that while the monsters were not very strong, they had also discovered some treasures on the fourth level of the labyrinth. At that moment, Rick shouted at Rude, demanding that he collect the materials from the monsters Rick had defeated as well. Rude replied that he couldn't collect the materials because they were too damaged, with the monster stones shattered. Rick, visibly annoyed, insisted that Rude should still check the materials, as there might be some that were intact. Rick also reminded Rude not to slack off, emphasizing that as their porter, and being only an E-rank adventurer and a miasma scavenger, it was his responsibility to perform his duties. Although Rude was reluctant to listen to Rick, he couldn't go against him after witnessing Rick's strength in combat. Hesitantly, Rude acknowledged Rick's command and agreed to collect the materials from the monsters Rick had killed. As Rude approached one of the monsters, he saw that the creatures Rick had killed were mangled, their guts and blood creating a terrible stench. Rude wondered why Rick had been so brutal in his method of killing. At that moment, he activated his fire magic, thinking it would be easier to retrieve the materials if he burned some of the monsters' bodies to make the collection process less unpleasant. Seeing Rude burning the monsters, Rick commented to the other two that Rude might be doing so to eat the monster meat. He added that, having been on the exploration for a while, he was starting to feel hungry and found the idea of monster meat somewhat appealing. Sasha, however, urged Rick to stop mentioning it, as the thought of eating monster meat grossed her out. Sasha reminded Rick that it was considered taboo for adventurers to eat monster meat because the monster's magic could be absorbed into their bodies, with unpredictable effects. Rick, smiling, reassured Sasha that he was only joking. He added that once they returned, he planned to use the money he had earned to enjoy as much delicious food as he wanted. But as Rick was saying that, the group suddenly became tense when they heard a powerful roar echoing through the labyrinth. Turning to face the source of the sound, they were stunned to see a towering minotaur standing before them. This B-rank monster was an alarming sight, as minotaurs were typically found in much deeper levels of the labyrinth, not the shallow fourth layer they were currently exploring. The group was thrown into disarray, realizing that they were severely outmatched. Each member knew that defeating a B-rank monster was far beyond their capabilities, given their lower levels and current state. They needed to quickly come up with a plan or find a way to escape, as the odds of facing the Minotaur head-on were overwhelmingly against them. At that moment, Bear shouted at Rude, demanding that he hand over his backpack so Bear could use its contents to deal with the Minotaur. Rude quickly complied, passing the backpack to Bear. He then asked Bear what their plan was to handle the situation and if Bear had any strategy in mind. However, as Bear received the backpack, he smiled menacingly. Without warning, he swung his sword and slashed Rude's back, causing Rude to fall to the ground, in pain and bleeding heavily. Bear's sinister grin revealed that his plan was far from what Rude had anticipated. Bear, after slashing Rude, called out to Rick and Sasha. Rick immediately responded by throwing an axe-like object and activating its spell, Warrior's Encouragement. This spell redirected the Minotaur's focus, making Rude, who was writhing on the ground in pain, the target of the monster's attacks. Meanwhile, Sasha activated her spell haste on herself, Rick, and Bear, boosting their running speed so they could escape from the Minotaur. Lying on the floor in agony, Rude asked the three if they had planned to abandon him from the very beginning. Bear, with a menacing smile, confirmed that Rude had been brought along solely as bait and that they had always intended to leave him behind. Rude was stunned by the revelation. As Bear, Rick, and Sasha fled, they told Rude to buy them some time while they escaped. Overwhelmed with rage, Rude screamed and cursed them for using him as bait and leaving him to die while they ran to safety. At that moment, the Minotaur's attention locked onto Rude due to the spell. Panic surged through Rude as he struggled to figure out his next move. The Minotaur unleashed a devastating blow to the ground, propelling Rude into the air. Though Rude managed to narrowly evade the attack, a pained smile crossed his face. Despite his successful dodge, he knew deep down that escaping the Minotaur was futile. The odds were stacked against him, and he braced himself for the inevitable. At that moment, the Minotaur launched itself with immense force toward Rude, crashing through the wall and sending them both into a new room. The impact was so powerful that the wall shattered, and they found themselves in an entirely different chamber. However, the room had a large hole in the floor, and both Rude and the Minotaur plunged into it. Moments later, Rude lay on the ground, racked with pain, slowly regaining consciousness. As he opened his eyes, he couldn't help but wonder if he was still alive. At that moment, Rude glanced to the side and saw that he was lying on top of the Minotaur's body. He realized that they had fallen through the hole together, and the Minotaur's body had cushioned his landing, saving him from a more severe impact. However, Rude's relief was short-lived as he grimly acknowledged that, even if the Minotaur had died, it was only a matter of time before he would meet the same fate. Rude thought to himself that even if no other monsters appeared, he would still face death from blood loss or starvation. Lying atop the Minotaur's body, he felt an intense hunger and longed for something to eat. As he considered the possibility of consuming the monster, a fleeting thought crossed his mind. Eating a monster could only lead to disaster. Despite this, Rude couldn't shake the memory of a man from his childhood who had once told him never to give up, no matter how tough or painful life became. Motivated by that memory, Rude resolved to survive against the odds and began to eat the Minotaur's body. If a human depleted of magic consumes the meat of a magic-rich monster, the monster's magic particles will invade their body, leading to a condition known as the monsterized state, a fate more terrifying than death itself, as it resembles being poisoned from within. This dreadful transformation has long been considered a taboo. However, in a desperate gamble to recover the blood he had lost and to quell his hunger, Rude devoured the Minotaur, triggering an unexpected transformation within him. Moments later, Rude stood up and began wandering through the labyrinth, dragging an axe in his hand. Upon closer inspection, his eyes had turned red, and he now resembled a monster, seemingly unable to control himself due to the Minotaur's magic coursing through him after consuming its flesh. At that instant, Rude activated his skill, Roar, sending a wave of intimidation through the area. The nearby monsters, overwhelmed by the sheer force of the skill, instantly perished. At that moment, Rude activated his skill, Physical Boost, temporarily enhancing his physical strength. Empowered by the skill, he swiftly killed all the nearby monsters with a single strike. He then activated echolocation, a skill that allowed him to detect creatures in his surroundings, even in complete darkness. As the skill revealed a swarm of monsters approaching, Rude prepared for battle, a grin spreading across his face. He taunted the monsters, asking which of them would be the next to be eaten. At that moment, Rude went berserk, launching into a killing spree, annihilating every monster that dared to attack him. As he fought, he realized that the battle axe he had picked up after Rick discarded it fit perfectly in his hand. He also noticed he could sense the monsters' magic without even needing to see them. Driven by an insatiable hunger, Rude continued his rampage, slaughtering every monster in his path and devouring their flesh. With each one he consumed, he felt a surge of power coursing through his body, growing stronger with every kill. Rude grinned with excitement, feeling an immense surge of power flowing through his body. He knew he could easily defeat all the monsters attacking him. After a few moments, his killing spree came to an end, and he found himself standing before the exit door of the labyrinth. As he pushed it open, he stepped outside, taking a deep breath of the fresh air. A smile spread across his face as he realized he was finally out of the labyrinth, finally free. With a burst of exhilaration, Rude shouted in triumph, proclaiming loudly that he had survived the labyrinth. Moments later, in the Adventurers Guild, a tense atmosphere filled the room as everyone present appeared worried. A man stood before Bear, Sasha, and Rick, questioning them. This man was Lankars, the guild master of the Bologna branch. After hearing their report about the events in the labyrinth, Lankars informed Bear that he had gathered all the adventurers who had been in the labyrinth, except for Rude, who had been part of their group. With a heavy and regretful expression, Bear told Lankars that when they reached the 4th floor and encountered the Minotaur, Rude had been killed before they even had a chance to protect him. Bear continued his lie, adding that they deeply regretted not recognizing the danger of the 4th floor sooner, which led to Rude's death. Rick and Sasha, meanwhile, put on sorrowful expressions, pretending as if they had genuinely tried to help Rude. After hearing Bear's account, Lankars nodded and said he understood the situation. He then announced that from that moment on, entry into the new labyrinth would be prohibited, as it was too dangerous for adventurers to explore with so little known about it. At that moment, Rude entered the Adventurers Guild, and a wave of shock swept through the room. Everyone had believed Rude had perished in the labyrinth. Bear, Rick, and Sasha were the most stunned, unable to comprehend how the person they had abandoned to die was now standing before them, seemingly unharmed. Bear quickly approached Rude, feigning relief as he said, "I'm so glad you're alive." Leaning in closer, Bear whispered in Rude's ear, warning him that if he said anything unnecessary, he would kill him. Rick and Sasha then joined Bear, smiling with exaggerated excitement as they asked if Rude was all right. Sasha added that they had tried to return for him, but the labyrinth had sealed itself, preventing any chance of helping him. Rude, however, remained silent, saying nothing in response to their lies. At that moment, Bear abruptly changed the subject and excitedly suggested that they celebrate Rude's survival of the Minotaur attack and successful escape from the labyrinth. He proposed they move the celebration to a different location, as the Adventurers Guild was not suitable for such an occasion. However, just as the group was about to leave the guild, they were stunned to find themselves unable to move. Rude seized the opportunity to speak up, declaring loudly that Bear, Sasha, and Rick had used Rick as a pawn in the labyrinth. The crowd was taken aback by Rude's revelation, while Bear, in a state of panic, frantically searched for a way to handle the situation. Bear, now visibly panicked, approached Rude and asked him to clarify what he meant, claiming he didn't understand Rude's accusations. Lankars interrupted, demanding an explanation from Rude about what he had meant when he said that Rick, Bear, and Sasha had used him as a pawn. Rude turned to Lankars and revealed that Bear had stolen his supplies and attacked him from behind. He further explained that Rick had used a skill to lure the Minotaur towards Rude, while Sasha had cast haste on everyone except Rude, allowing them to escape while leaving him behind as bait. The three accused individuals were now in a state of panic as Rude's revelations about their actions unfolded. In a state of panic, Bear turned to Lankars, insisting that they had done nothing wrong and that Rude's accusations were false. As Bear spoke, Lankars informed him that they would uncover the truth. At that moment, a woman approached them, the truth officer. The three were astonished and alarmed to see the truth officer, who rarely left the royal capital, present in the Adventurers Guild. Lankars then explained that, due to the unusually high number of deaths among the porters who had temporarily joined their party, he had called in the truth officer to investigate the matter thoroughly. The three became even more frantic upon hearing Lankars's explanation, while Rude remained calm, knowing the trouble Bear, Rick, and Sasha were about to face. The truth officer, maintaining a cold, neutral expression, examined the group and used her spell to determine who was truthful. She announced that Bear, Rick, and Sasha from the Scarlet Sword were lying, while Rude was telling the truth. The revelation shocked everyone, and Bear, now in a state of panic, desperately pointed at the truth officer and accused her of being wrong. He shouted that she didn't understand what had truly happened and that she was lying. At that moment, Lankars informed everyone that the truth officer's skill was exceptionally rare. He explained that such a skill could not be acquired later in life and was as effective as a unique skill, with no lie able to bypass it. Landkars emphasized that nothing could be more reliable than the words of someone who had pledged their power to the country, directing a look of anger at Bear as he spoke. Bear, overwhelmed by the revelation, could only stare in panic, unable to find a response. Landkars then shouted at the three, condemning them for violating the adventurer's taboo of abandoning a comrade. He accused them of intentionally injuring their allies and using them as disposable pawns. Landkars further declared that, even if their crimes were thoroughly investigated, it was certain their adventurer qualifications would be revoked and they would be reduced to slavery. Sasha screamed in fear at the prospect, while Rick stood in stunned disbelief, unable to process the gravity of their situation. Upon hearing Landkars's words, Bear clenched his fists and muttered quietly that he refused to believe someone like him could become a slave. His gaze turned to the truth officer with anger as he thought that if she hadn't been present, they might have escaped the consequences. In a fit of rage, Bear drew his sword and swung it at the truth officer, intent on killing her. The onlookers were shocked by the sudden violence, but just as Bear was about to strike, Rude intervened, stepping between them and blocking the attack with his own sword. With a fierce look of anger, Rude told Bear that he should not dare to harm the truth officer. Bear was stunned that Rude had managed to block his attack. In retaliation, Rude threw a powerful punch that sent Bear flying backward. The force of the punch was so immense that Bear crashed through the wall of the Adventurers Guild and was propelled a considerable distance away. Rick and Sasha watched in shock, unable to comprehend the extent of Rude's power. Meanwhile, Rude stood confidently, clearly satisfied with his decisive action against Bear. A short while later, in the Adventurers Guild reception room, Rude and Landkars were conversing. Landkars apologized to Rude for any inconvenience, noting that he might be tired after everything that had happened in the labyrinth. Rude assured the guild master that he was fine and then inquired about the fate of the other three. Landkars explained that they would be taken into custody by the staff and subjected to interrogation. He added that if it was confirmed they were repeat offenders who had used their porters as bait, the members of the Scarlet Sword would forfeit all their possessions and adventurer qualifications, and would be reduced to slavery. Landkars then informed Rude that Bear had even defied the truth officer, so he likely wouldn't be seen again. He also told Rude that the three members of the Scarlet Sword had forfeited all their rights to the profits from the new labyrinth. As a result, Landkars said that Rude would now receive all the rewards. Rude was stunned to hear that he would be awarded 200,000 reins, the entire sum from the new labyrinth's rewards previously meant for the three. The news left Rude astonished at the substantial reward he was now receiving all on his own. After a few moments, Rude stepped out of the reception room and stood outside, grinning with excitement. He thought to himself that with this much money, he could easily cover his living expenses. Rude realized that accumulating such an amount through diligent gathering of miasma grass would take a long time, so he appreciated how being an adventurer could yield substantial rewards. As he walked, he noticed that no other adventurers were approaching him. Rude speculated that this might be because they had witnessed his earlier actions. He considered that even if they didn't approach him in the future, it didn't necessarily mean they would be friendly. Rude then thought to himself that if he stood out too much, many adventurers might find his sudden rise in status suspicious. He decided that he would continue earning in the miasma labyrinth as before. Resolving not to dwell on the past, Rude was determined to move forward. With his new wealth, he could finally afford some gear and enjoy the freedom to eat whatever he wanted. Excited about his plans, Rude decided to visit a tool shop first to buy the gear he needed. As he wandered through the market, Rude noticed a magic bag that caught his interest. He decided to get something to eat before focusing on anything else. The next day, Rude returned to the miasma labyrinth and resumed hunting rats. He found it surprising how easily he could defeat the miasma rats now, in contrast to before. Rude sighed, reflecting on how just the day before yesterday, he would have had to avoid 5 of these rats, but now he could take them down effortlessly. At that moment, Rude used his skill appraisal to examine the miasma rats and check their status. He was pleased to discover that his appraisal skill allowed him to view each monster's stats with ease. Rude realized that the skill he had gained from consuming a specific monster could be used not only on living monsters but also on their corpses. At that moment, Rude wondered how much his status had improved. He reflected on how easily he had defeated the rats and guessed that his level might not have increased significantly, perhaps only reaching level 20. Curious, he opened his status screen. To his astonishment, Rude found that his level had risen to 42. Not only that, but his health, strength, endurance, and agility had all seen substantial increases. Shocked by the rapid progression, considering he had been level 7 just a day ago, Rude realized this was an exceptional occurrence. Deciding to investigate further, he decided to check the new skills he had acquired. As Rude reviewed his newly acquired skills, he was thrilled to discover that he had gained many of them. Excited by the prospect, he recalled that the walls broken during his battle with the Minotaur had since been sealed, and the new labyrinth would remain closed for some time. Deciding to explore the miasma labyrinth lightly for the day, Rude was eager to test his newfound power. He couldn't wait to see how effective his abilities would be on the deeper floors. Additionally, he had purchased the magic bag he had noticed earlier and wanted to select the right monster for his first trial. After careful consideration, Rude decided to venture into the deeper levels of the miasma labyrinth. He easily conquered the 6th floor, and then proceeded to the 9th and 13th floors. As he fought the monsters on these floors, Rude realized they were insufficiently challenging for his newfound strength. Determined to find more suitable prey for testing his powers, he pressed on. Moments later, Rude reached the 24th floor of the labyrinth. As he traversed this level, he encountered a monster. Hiding from view, Rude used his skill appraisal to examine the monster's status. He discovered that it was a lizard soldier, level 25, of the dragon tribe, and it possessed 3 types of skills. Seeing the status of the lizard soldier, Rude noted that it was typically part of a group and fought in coordination with its companions. However, since only one lizard soldier was present, Rude decided it was worth challenging. He stealthily approached from behind, drew his sword, and struck the lizard soldier in the back. Though the blow caused injury, it wasn't enough to finish the lizard soldier off. Rude smiled, thinking that the lizard soldier wasn't too formidable. He resolved to make sure his next strike would not miss. At that moment, the injured lizard soldier tried to flee in desperation. Rude gave chase, calling out for it to stop. After a while, the lizard soldier reached a dead end with no further escape routes. As Rude closed in, he told the lizard soldier that it had no chance to escape. However, when the lizard soldier turned to face Rude, it no longer seemed intimidated. At that moment, Rude realized he was in serious trouble. Looking behind him, he saw more lizard soldiers surrounding him, and it dawned on him that he had walked into a trap. Despite the level difference, the situation was dire. One of the lizard soldiers swung its sword at Rude, but he managed to dodge the attack just in time. Rude quickly assessed the situation and concluded that, given the trap and the numerical disadvantage, his only option was to defeat the lizard soldiers one by one. At that moment, Rude struck one of the lizard soldiers, sending it sprawling to the ground. As he moved in to finish it off, another lizard soldier intervened, using its shield to block Rude's attack. Rude was taken aback by the lizard soldier's timely defense. Just then, another lizard soldier attacked Rude from behind. However, Rude managed to evade the incoming strike with quick reflexes. As Rude surveyed his surroundings, he noticed that he was surrounded by numerous lizard soldiers. He thought to himself that, while these monsters were skilled at teamwork, he hadn't expected them to execute such sophisticated ambush tactics or coordinate their movements at such a high level. As Rude considered his options and continued fighting the lizard soldiers, he noticed a high-pitched sound that seemed to precede their coordinated attacks. Looking further, he spotted a red-colored lizard soldier standing at a distance, observing the battle. Rude used his appraisal skill to assess the red lizard soldier. He discovered that it was a general lizard, level 32, belonging to the beast species. Among its many skills, the most notable was command, which allowed it to direct the other lizard soldiers according to its will. Rude smiled with excitement as he realized he had identified the leader of the lizard soldiers. At that moment, the general lizard let out a fierce roar, prompting all the other lizard soldiers to launch a coordinated attack against Rude. Unbothered, Rude activated his physical boost skill, channeling immense power into his strikes. He pushed through the swarm of lizard soldiers and charged straight toward the general lizard. As Rude sliced at the general lizard, he was stunned to find that his attack did no damage. It seemed to have no effect on the creature. The General Lizard retaliated with a powerful sword strike, and realizing he couldn't block the blow, Rude activated his steel body skill. The General Lizard's attack failed to harm him. With a confident smile, Rude addressed the General Lizard, declaring that it wasn't the only one with a trump card. He had one of his own. Rude used his appraisal skill once more, perplexed by the fact that his attack had no visible effect on the General Lizard despite the clear impact he felt. He checked the General Lizard's status and saw that it didn't have any skills enhancing its durability. Rude speculated that another lizard might be using a skill to protect the General Lizard. As he continued to appraise the lizard soldiers, Rude noticed one that was gravely injured. Checking its status, he discovered that it had a skill called Substitute, which absorbed the damage meant for the General Lizard, thereby shielding it from harm. At that moment, Rude swiftly moved to the lizard soldier with the Substitute skill and eliminated it instantly. With its protection gone, the General Lizard was thrown into a state of panic, realizing it could no longer withstand Rude's attacks. Roaring in frustration, the General Lizard ordered all the remaining lizard soldiers to attack Rude simultaneously. But just as they closed in, Rude activated his thread manipulation skill. Rude quickly gathered all the lizard soldiers into one spot, making it easier for him to handle them. He then cast his spell, ensnaring the lizard soldiers in a trap that immobilized them completely. With a satisfied smile, Rude turned to the General Lizard and declared that its end had come. He then swiftly severed the General Lizard's head from its body. After a few moments, Rude had dispatched all the lizard soldiers in the area. He smiled to himself, knowing it was time to eat the monsters he had slain. He reached into his magic bag, which he had purchased with the reward money from the guild. The magic bag, enchanted to expand its space and reduce the weight of its contents when closed, was now a vital tool for him. Rude then retrieved his cooking utensils and seasonings from the bag, preparing to cook the monster meat from the creatures he had just defeated. Rude reflected on his time in the hidden floors, where his only focus had been survival. Despite his desperation, he had always harbored a desire to try cooking monster meat. Now, having prepared it, he admired how appetizing the meat looked and anticipated that it would taste exceptional. Rude eagerly grabbed a piece and took a bite, smiling with pleasure as he discovered that the flavor was indeed superb. The meat was far more delicious than he had imagined, and Rude mused that he might soon become addicted to eating monster meat. As Rude enjoyed the monster meat, he found that he had acquired several new skills, many of which were quite impressive. He wondered how he had gained such valuable abilities and speculated that they might be linked to the magical powers of the monsters he had consumed. Rude reflected on the skills he had acquired, noting that the armor spider skill from the Minotaur was particularly impressive. The evil eye skill from another monster was also quite useful. Additionally, he had gained several potentially powerful skills from monsters he hadn't yet tested. Brimming with excitement, Rude decided that on his way back, he would make it a point to consume as many different monsters as possible to expand his collection of new skills. On the 21st floor of the Miasma Labyrinth, Rude continued to defeat various monsters, systematically acquiring their skills by consuming them. As he dispatched and devoured a diverse range of creatures, he gained a multitude of abilities, including venom, temperature variation, poison scale powder, and many others. As Rude was enjoying the monster meat he had cooked, he suddenly heard a strange sound coming from behind him. Curious, he paused, trying to figure out the source of the noise. It became clearer, a distinct crashing sound, almost human. Rude wondered if there were other adventurers who had managed to venture as deep into the labyrinth as he had. Without wasting a moment, he quickly packed all his belongings into his magic bag and rushed toward the direction of the noise, eager to discover who, or what, might be waiting ahead. Rude thought to himself that encountering other parties in combat was quite rare, and he considered that if he were lucky, he might even have the opportunity to exchange information with them. As he approached, he saw a woman, cloaked and bleeding from her hand, lying on the floor. She was surrounded by a group of suspicious-looking men who seemed intent on doing her harm. One of the men spoke up, expressing disbelief at how much magic the woman on the floor still had left despite her injuries. Another man, who was bruised and battered, explained that their situation was dire because the woman was an elf. He remarked with a hint of curiosity about how valuable the elf woman might be. At that moment, Rude spoke up, saying he had hoped to make some adventurer friends, but he wasn't pleased with the current situation. The men were taken aback by his voice, but Rude continued, admitting he didn't know the full story, yet couldn't just stand by and watch a woman being attacked. The man who seemed to be in charge asked Rude who he was, to which Rude replied that he was an adventurer. The elf woman then shouted at Rude, urging him to leave, warning him that the men surrounding her were adventurer hunters. Rude was momentarily surprised upon hearing the woman's warning. He had always heard that adventurer hunters were high-ranking adventurers. Curious, he used his appraisal skill to check their status, but to his surprise, he couldn't access any information. This made him wonder if they were using concealment skills or perhaps a counter-magic tool. Just then, the leader ordered his men to take Rude down immediately. Without warning, one of them lunged at Rude, swinging his sword with deadly intent. Rude was shocked by the man's speed but managed to block the attack just in time. As they fought, the man remarked that Rude was holding up pretty well against him. Rude, unfazed, retorted that it was only because the man was weak. Enraged, the man shouted that he was not weak and began attacking Rude with increased ferocity, vowing to smash Rude's head. In that moment, Rude activated one of his skills, Venom, and spat it directly onto the man's face. The man screamed in pain as the venom burned into his skin, writhing in agony on the ground. Everyone was stunned by what they had witnessed. They couldn't believe Rude had the ability to spit venom and began to think of him as something more akin to a monster. Rude reflected that his fighting style was reckless, completely unlike that of a typical adventurer. But for someone as weak as him, survival meant using any means necessary to defeat his enemies. At that moment, the man who had been sprayed with venom lay dead on the ground. The leader, witnessing this, realized that Rude possessed a rare skill, poison, and quickly understood they had underestimated him. Determined not to make the same mistake, the leader ordered his men to charge at Rude all at once, hoping to overwhelm him and prevent any chance of escape. As they attacked him relentlessly, Rude dodged their strikes, thinking that if he paused for even a second, he would be killed instantly. He couldn't afford a single mistake. While retreating for just a moment, the leader seized the opportunity and unleashed a devastating blow. At the last second, Rude activated his steel body skill, hardening himself to block the powerful attack, narrowly avoiding serious harm. Rude was sent flying backward from the leader's powerful kick. The leader, surprised, thought to himself that Rude was a tough opponent, as he was certain the kick should have broken Rude's neck. As one of the men approached Rude, he threatened to end his life right then and there. However, as he got closer, Rude suddenly turned and began to run away. The man yelled at Rude to stop running and began chasing after him. However, just as he took off, the leader ordered him to halt, pointing out that both he and Rude were now walking on a poisonous swamp. The leader warned his companion that venturing any deeper would be dangerous, as there was no guarantee they'd survive. He also added that Rude wouldn't last long in the swamp either, and eventually, he'd have no choice but to come back out. Glancing back at them, Rude wondered how long they planned to wait by the edge of the swamp. Realizing that stalling wasn't an option, he resolved to face them head-on and compete as adventurers would. Rude thought to himself how fortunate he was to have ended up in the poisonous swamp. In addition to its toxic nature, the swamp's vapors rapidly drained an adventurer's stamina, which worked in his favor. A few minutes later, the men were shocked that Rude had been inside the swamp for so long. One of the men, visibly struggling to breathe, asked his companions how much longer Rude planned to stay in the poisonous swamp. It had already been 10 minutes, and even though they weren't directly in the swamp, they were starting to feel sick from the fumes. Meanwhile, Rude, who was even deeper in the swamp, remained there, seemingly unaffected. At that moment, Rude decided it was time to make his move. He had waited long enough, hoping the poisonous swamp would weaken them further. However, he realized that if he delayed any longer, it would only worsen the elf woman's condition, as she was seriously injured. Approaching the group, Rude asked how they were faring after being exposed to both the poison and the swamp's magic, and if they were feeling rough. One of the men sneered, commenting that Rude had finally emerged from the swamp and had caused them a lot of trouble. Rude calmly replied that, unfortunately for them, he was unaffected by any status abnormalities, so he couldn't really understand just how much pain they were in. The leader was taken aback upon realizing that Rude possessed a status nullification skill and had tricked them. He immediately shouted for his men to attack and kill Rude right then and there. One of the men lunged at Rude, but the effects of the poisonous swamp had weakened him significantly, allowing Rude to easily block the attack. With a smile, Rude taunted the man as they fought, explaining that the poison gradually drained their stamina while the accumulated magic in their bodies lowered their stats. Just then, another man attacked Rude from behind. However, Rude activated his steel body skill, and the man's sword failed to inflict any damage, leaving him shocked at what had just happened. Seizing the opportunity, Rude then unleashed another skill, Lightning Cloak, swiftly defeating both attackers in one move. One of the men, barely able to breathe, shouted at Rude and prepared to attack again. But in an instant, Rude activated his aerial slash skill, finishing the man off immediately. The leader watched in panic, unable to believe that a human could possess multiple skills typically found in monsters. Shifting his focus to the leader, Rude declared that he had no obligation to explain anything and launched his attack. As they fought, the leader thought to himself that, despite his supposed superiority in combat against humans, he realized he was destined to lose to Rude. Desperate, the man activated his agility enhancement skill to boost his stats. Shouting in anger, he declared that someone like Rude wouldn't be able to defeat him. However, as he swung his sword, Rude delivered a powerful strike that shattered the man's sword into two pieces. The man stood in shock, unable to comprehend that he had been defeated by Rude. In that instant, he was cut in half along with his weapon, lifeless on the ground. Rude looked down at the fallen man and remarked that if it hadn't been for the abnormal status nullification he possessed, the man would have been far stronger. But because of Rude's unique ability, he had been able to overcome him. After a few moments, Rude had successfully saved the elf woman, and they walked alongside each other. She turned to Rude, expressing her gratitude for his help, saying she didn't know what she would have done without him. Rude replied that he couldn't just leave her in such a perilous situation. As he observed her, Rude noticed that the elf was trying to appear brave, but her body still showed signs of being affected by the poisonous swamp's magic. Setting that aside, Rude found it unusual to encounter an elf in such a remote area and began to wonder what circumstances had led her to be pursued by adventurer hunters. As they continued walking, a monster suddenly appeared right in front of them. Using his appraisal skill, Rude identified the creature as the Mosfa's Great, the leader of the Moths, a level 37 monster. Determined, Rude charged at the beast, thinking to himself that its size wouldn't be enough to take him down. At that moment, the monster unleashed its aerial slash attack, but Rude skillfully dodged it. He then turned to the elf woman, asking if she was okay. She reassured him that she was fine. Satisfied, Rude faced the monster again and declared that he was going to scare it, as it had managed to frighten him for just a moment. The monster flew higher, trying to create distance to avoid Rude's attacks. Undeterred, Rude shouted at the creature, telling it that its efforts were futile. He then unleashed his own aerial slash skill, striking the monster and dealing significant damage. Furious from the hit, the monster retaliated by using its paralyze skill. Rude simply smiled at the monster and confidently declared that it was too bad, as paralysis wouldn't work on him, he was immune to it. At that moment, Rude suddenly remembered the elf woman and grew concerned that the paralysis could affect her. However, when he turned to look at her, he saw that she had activated her wind magic, successfully blocking the monster's attack. Rude was impressed by the skill she displayed. After a few moments of intense combat, Rude finally defeated the monster with a powerful strike from his sword. The elf woman approached Rude and expressed her surprise that poison and paralysis had no effect on him, noting that he possessed skills remarkably similar to those of monsters. Rude smiled nervously, feeling awkward as he struggled to find the right words to explain his situation to her. Suddenly, the elf woman winced in pain and collapsed to the ground. Rude rushed to her side, worried she had been affected by the paralysis skill. However, she reassured him that this was something different, adding that she would explain her circumstances in more detail once they were outside the labyrinth. Moments later, they found themselves outside the miasma labyrinth, sitting on the ground near a tree. The elf woman smiled at Rude, expressing how much better she felt now that they were out of the labyrinth. Before explaining her situation, she said she wanted to introduce herself properly. With that, she told Rude her name was Alicia and that she was a former adventurer. Rude was taken aback, asking if she was the one and only Alicia of the Emerald Storm. Alicia laughed and confirmed that she was indeed the adventurer he had mentioned. Rude then remarked that the kingdom of Ludia's renowned S-rank party, known as Azure Trails, was famous, and everyone was aware of its members. However, 5 years ago, the party was defeated by monsters. Upon hearing this, Alicia explained that on that fateful day, they had challenged the monsters lurking in the deepest part of the S-rank labyrinth, known as the Abyssal Labyrinth. During that battle, their leader had died, one member had to retire due to severe injuries, and another had been swallowed by the labyrinth itself. Alicia added that even she hadn't emerged from that battle unscathed, revealing a mark on her chest as proof of her injuries. Rude initially panicked as Alicia began to open her clothing to reveal her chest. However, as he looked closer, he noticed a distinct purple mark on her skin. Alicia explained that this mark was a curse placed on her during the battle, known as the Curse of Level Down. Hearing this, Rude felt confused, as he had never encountered such a curse before. Alicia admitted she was in the same boat, she had never heard of it either. She shared that she had tried every possible method to break the curse but had only managed to slow its progression. Alicia then told Rude that the other adventurers they had encountered were aware of her curse and had been planning to profit from it. She expressed her despair, explaining that she would die if her level reached 0, and she couldn't bear the thought of being at the mercy of those men. In that moment, Rude noticed something and told Alicia that she might have a way to combat the curse. He remembered that he possessed a skill called Substitute, which allowed him to select a target and absorb their attacks and status ailments. Rude expressed his desire to test something out, asking Alicia if she would be willing to accept the skill he was about to activate. Alicia looked at him, confused by what he meant. Alicia then told Rude that she was ready to proceed. Rude placed his hand on her and activated his substitute skill. Alicia was taken aback as she felt the curse within her begin to transfer to Rude. Panic set in, and she urged him to stop, fearing that the curse would affect him. Rude smiled reassuringly at Alicia, telling her not to worry and that everything would be fine, she just needed to trust him. Just then, a dark presence materialized behind Rude, and Alicia stared in shock at the unfolding scene. Rude used his skill, and his unique ability, Abnormal Status Nullification, activated. In that moment, the curse that had plagued Alicia vanished, leaving her free of its effects. As Rude reveled in the success of his actions, Alicia looked at him in confusion and asked what had just happened. Rude encouraged her to check her guild card. When she looked at her status card, she was astonished to see that her status was now normal and the curse had been lifted. Alicia couldn't believe it, she was free from the curse. Rude explained that he had hoped his unique skill, Abnormal Status Nullification, would be able to nullify her curse. He felt a sense of relief, glad that it had worked effectively and safely removed the curse from her body. Alicia, looking at Rude with a mix of frustration and admiration, exclaimed that he was an idiot for taking such a huge risk for someone he had just met. However, her tone softened as she added that she was grateful for his actions. With a warm smile, she thanked him for saving her. Rude returned her smile, placing his hands on her shoulders reassuringly. He told her not to worry about it any longer, conveying his genuine desire to help her. A short while later, Rude and Alicia found themselves enjoying a meal at the Full Belly restaurant. Alicia commented on how delicious the food was, praising the alcohol as well. She added that Rude certainly knew how to pick a good place. Rude, however, recalled the last time he had been there and how he had been kicked out. Concerned, he asked Alicia if it was wise for her to be drinking so much, given her recent injuries. Alicia reassured him, saying she had fully recovered and that on such a momentous occasion, it was only right for her to indulge. With a bright smile, she declared that they should drink to their heart's content. At that moment, Rude turned to Alicia and asked what her plans were moving forward. After pondering for a moment, Alicia smiled and said she wanted to learn more about Rude first. She then asked him why he had chosen to become an adventurer. Rude took a deep breath and shared his story. He explained that long ago, his village had been attacked by monsters, resulting in the loss of both his family and friends. However, In that moment of despair, an S-rank adventurer had rushed to the scene and saved him, allowing Rude to survive despite the tragedy. He told Alicia he would never forget the sight of that adventurer smiling down at him during such a dark time. At that moment, Rude expressed his aspiration to become an S-rank adventurer, just like the one who had saved him. He shared that his goal was to save as many people as possible and that he hoped to accomplish this dream soon. Alicia, hearing his heartfelt ambition, smiled gently at him and said it was a wonderful goal to have. Rude then asked Alicia if she was going to laugh at his dreams, but she reassured him that she understood, as she had once dreamed of reaching S-rank herself. Alicia explained that her current intention was to gain even more power than she had before being cursed. She added that she was certain her companions were still trapped in the deepest part of the abyssal labyrinth. Whatever the outcome, Alicia was determined to challenge the monsters in that labyrinth once again. Alicia then suggested to Rude that, since they were both still weak and needed to gain more strength to achieve their goals, they should form a party together. Just as Rude was about to respond, two men approached from behind. One of them grabbed Alicia's hand and, grinning, told Rude that he had quite a fine girl to be drinking with. Rude glanced at the two men and recognized them as the same individuals who had kicked him out the last time he entered the restaurant. One of the men then told Alicia that she should leave Rude and not waste her time drinking with someone as boring as him. Just then, Rude grabbed the man by the shoulders and, filled with anger, demanded that he let go of Alicia's hand. The man filled with rage at Rude's defiance, and just as it seemed they were about to come to blows, Alicia intervened. She urged them to stop, reminding them that they were in a pub, and suggested that if they were going to settle things, they should do so by seeing who could drink the most. At that moment, the crowd erupted in cheers, excited to witness the drinking contest and eager to see who would emerge victorious. They drank, and before long, both men were too intoxicated and passed out. Alicia, on the other hand, stood tall and unwavering. At that moment, the cheers erupted as the winner was declared, Alicia. She and Rude exchanged glances and raised their thumbs in celebration, relishing their victory in the unexpected showdown. After a while, Rude and Alicia found themselves standing in a corner of the restaurant. Rude complimented Alicia, saying she had done exceptionally well, especially considering how much she had already drunk before the contest. With a slightly dazed expression, Alicia replied that she could hold her own because Rude was her benefactor. She added that she would never stoop so low as to remain idle while he was being ridiculed by the two men. Just as she finished her sentence, the effects of the drinks took hold, and she dozed off, collapsing into Rude's arms. Smiling at her, Rude activated his skill, Substitute, transferring all of her drunkenness to himself. Alicia suddenly woke up, no longer feeling the effects of drunkenness. Rude explained that he had transferred all of her intoxication to himself, leaving her sober. Excitedly, Alicia grabbed Rude's hand and exclaimed that he had first transferred her curse and now her drunkenness, marveling at the wonderful skill he possessed. She insisted that they should definitely form a party together. After a moment, Alicia suggested they celebrate by drinking more, now that she was sober. However, Rude gently reminded her to drink in moderation. Alicia, feeling disappointed, turned to the owner of the restaurant and expressed her sadness about not being able to try any of the special dishes. The owner explained that monsters had taken up residence in the Barnama's fishing grounds, and although he had sent a request to the guild for assistance, all the top adventurers were already deployed elsewhere. As a result, he couldn't prepare any of the special dishes due to a lack of ingredients. At that moment, he asked Alicia and Rude if they would be willing to take on the request to handle the monsters at the Barnama's fishing grounds. The next day, Rude and Alicia found themselves at the Barnama's fishing grounds, filled with excitement and intrigue as they took in the surroundings. Alicia turned to Rude and said they should defeat the monsters as quickly as possible so they could return to the restaurant and enjoy the special dishes. Rude nodded in agreement, eager to accomplish their mission and savor the delicious food waiting for them. At that moment, Rude spotted something moving beneath the water's surface and felt a surge of excitement as he realized they had found the monster the owner had mentioned. However, both Rude and Alicia's expressions shifted to concern as they noticed that they were now surrounded by numerous monsters lurking in the water. In that moment, Rude activated his appraisal skill to identify the monsters surrounding them. He discovered they were called gurnibs, mostly at level 23, and possessed 3 skills: high-speed swimming, water bullets, and snipe. Suddenly, all the monsters launched a coordinated attack, firing water bullets at Rude and Alicia. Rude struggled to dodge their onslaught, as the small boat offered little room to maneuver, making it difficult to evade the incoming projectiles. In that moment, Rude had a brilliant idea and jumped into the water, grinning as he challenged the monsters to come at him however they wished. As the Gurnibs charged, Rude activated his skill, Lightning Cloak, unleashing a powerful surge that struck all the monsters in the water, instantly killing them. As he emerged from the depths, Alicia called out Rude's name in panic, but he reassured her that he was perfectly fine. After surveying the area, Rude realized that although he had defeated many of the monsters, a few remained in the deeper waters nearby. At that moment, Rude couldn't understand why the remaining monsters weren't attacking him. He speculated whether they were simply being cautious or if they were trying to protect something. He then shouted to Alicia, informing her that he was going to dive deeper to investigate the situation. Rude asked her if she could assist him, and after a brief exchange, he secured a rope around his chest. With everything set, Rude took a deep breath and began his descent into the depths of the water. As Rude dove deeper into the water, he soon realized why the Gurnib monsters had ceased their attacks. They were guarding something significant. His gaze shifted to reveal a massive creature looming in the depths. Rude activated his appraisal skill, and the monster's details came into focus. Its name was Tentacles, it was level 38, and it possessed 4 formidable skills, along with impressively high stats. The sheer size and presence of the creature made it clear that it was a formidable guardian of whatever lay in this underwater realm. As Rude gazed at the massive creature, he couldn't help but think about its sheer size. Observing it closely, he realized that this was the source of the smaller Gurnib monsters, it was the one producing them. Rude understood that if he didn't defeat this larger monster, there would be no point in continually battling the smaller ones, as the giant would simply keep spawning more. Determined, he knew that taking down the tentacles was essential to stopping the cycle once and for all. Rude realized that since the tentacle monster wasn't displaying any immediate signs of aggression, he could take a moment to prepare before confronting it. However, just as he began to strategize, one of the monster's tentacles lashed out, grabbing him by the feet and yanking him closer. In that instant, Rude understood that it had all been a trap. The smaller monsters had deliberately refrained from attacking him to lower his guard, allowing them to capitalize on his moment of inattention. At that moment, the tentacle monster lunged at Rude just as he was starting to run out of breath, struggling to stay underwater. Desperate, Rude pulled the rope, signaling Alicia for help. Responding swiftly, Alicia activated her wind magic, propelling the boat forward at high speed while simultaneously yanking Rude away from the grasp of the monsters. Once back at the surface, Rude gasped for air, coughing violently from inhaling too much water. Alicia, visibly concerned, asked if he was okay. Rude managed to sit up, grateful, and thanked Alicia for saving him. That's all for today. Thanks for watching.